Hello gamers, Powered Heal here, and today we're talking about PoE patch 3.27 Keepers League. So we're going to be doing a build guide, and it's going to be the Totem Hierophant. This is something we do every time, just kind of updating it a bit for 3.27, and I'm just going to kind of run through the PoB really quick here. So basically, it's an Totem build, and we rely on quite a few uniques, but they're all very cheap, and none of these are needed to start the build at all. So you can basically just go through the campaign with a 4-link, and I'll talk about that at the end of the video. But yeah, you can just do a 4-link in rares, and then you can upgrade to these as you get them. They're pretty much all very cheap except for Anathema, so that's why they're in the budget version as well. And we'll talk about a build that's a little bit, more advanced, and then we'll link both the POBs down below. But this is going to be what we're going to get you started with. So we'll just kind of go over the items at first. This staff is just really cheap. It's part of the reason why we use it. And we also combine it with the staff nodes on the tree for a lot of damage. We get a huge benefit from things like staff mastery here because we don't actually crit, our totems do. So we get this effect all the time. And yeah, just really strong. We also get a bunch of block from here, and we don't really have too many defenses on this build. It's sort of squishy. We're very much relying on the kind of inherent tankiness of not being hit, with the totems and things of that nature. We also have totem taunt and stuff like that, so that's where a lot of the tankiness comes from. And the idea is that we're getting a lot of damage from these nodes, and we also supplement a bit with block. You see we have max spell block and then 25% attack block, so it's kind of good because when something does hit you, the idea is not much is going to hit you, but when something does get through, it has a high chance to be blocked anyway. And realistically, we have enough, one-hit damage, right, where we're unlikely to be one-shot by any given singular thing, which means that it would take multiple hits to one-shot us, and spell hits tend to be the thing that's going to be most likely to do that from range, which is why we stack spell block. The idea is if we take one big spell hit, even if it doesn't get spell blocked, it's fine. If we take multiple kind of medium hits, it's most likely that at least one or so is going to get blocked. So that's the thought process behind what we're doing here. Like I said, this is really cheap. You upgrade this to a +3 staff later, and then eventually a +5 if you really want to go down that route. I can make a video about that later. The head, you just use any helm that you can, and you just get damage on the implicits. You can really get anything you want. There's also mana regen, stuff like that, but I would recommend damage. So yeah, just anything of that nature. Soul Mantle is pretty core, but again, this is not something you need right away. It's nice to try and get as early as you can though, because it essentially gives you a free link. And it also gives you a lot of damage because it allows you to inflict a hex on yourself, and then we use this jewel self-flagnation that gives you damage per hex on yourself. And then we also just have reduced effective curses on us, so we don't suffer any of the downsides of the curses. That's basically a very common way to play a lot of totem builds, especially in softcore where you don't need the extra defense. You can really use stuff like Soul Mantle. Is this build hardcore viable? I would say, probably wouldn't want to run it like this. It's fine in early maps. I'd say even probably through tier 16s, but if you're trying to get into really sketchy content with a build like this, it's a little bit squishy, and it can be a little bit squishy in tier 16s. Like it's not, you're not going to die very often, but you actually have a chance of dying, where you could build it in other ways where you would basically never die. So I wouldn't recommend this setup for hardcore, but if you wanted to do a hardcore build, you could kind of look at this and then adapt a little bit based on your needs and your preferences. Speaking of which, what does this build kind of excel at? I guess would have been a good thing to mention. So it's fast, quick, cheap, easy, I would say. So the one thing that might take getting used to is kind of dropping the totems, because people often view totem builds as like completely brain dead, but the totem placement really does matter. So it might take a little bit to get used to that. Once you get used to that, though, it's very powerful. Early on through the campaign, all the way through tier 16, you can get your watchstone super easily with this build. The main place where it sort of falls off is it's not like a super great tier 17 clearer in my opinion, although it can clear them, especially depending on which one you're doing. It definitely handles like the easier ones, like the Fortress boss is like super easy, and there's some other ones that aren't too bad as well. And obviously, given the totem playstyle, you can take the tier 16s as kind of like as slow as you want to some degree. So it's not that it doesn't do tier 16 or tier 17s, but it's just not the best at them, I would say. And it's something that really doesn't do super well in Ubers unless you invest a lot of currency. So just another thing to keep in mind there. You're not going to be like slaying Ubers really easily on this budget version. The gloves here, so these are the next unique that we use. They relatively cheap. They're going to be sort of expensive like super early on, like in the first hours, but then they fall off a cliff. We're using it for the enemies in chilling areas, take 35% increased lightning damage. It's 35% more damage essentially. And you can see that we have Cold Snap, and that's basically how we get the chilling area. So this is only going to be for bosses. You're not going to be dropping this all the time. It also sometimes gives you some frenzy charges, which can be nice, because if you kill stuff on the area, you actually just get frenzy charges, even though your totems killed them. So that's pretty cool. And, if you want, you can kind of drop a Cold Snap every so often, and you can keep your charges up throughout the map if it's something that's really important for you. Most of the time, the damage difference is sort of negligible for trash, so you don't really have to worry about it too much. Rainbow Stride, so this is just something that's like really cheap and helps us cap out our spell block and things of that nature. The nice thing is, as you can see, we're a little bit over spell block cap, which means you don't need a max roll on these. Typically the only roll that is expensive at all are max roll, and everything under max roll is less desirable, because usually when people are using this item, they want to get every last bit of spell block out of it. We're kind of using it as just a temporary item until we maybe upgrade to something better with more move speed. So it's really good in the interim because it's 20 to all res. You can get 15 to spell block very easily. You can even corrupt it. If you corrupt it and you get move speed, it actually becomes quite a good pair of boots. It just doesn't have life, but it has kind of everything else you want. It's got the spell block, it's got some mana, it has some resistance, and it's got like essentially 29 movement speed, which is about all you can ask on like kind of starter boots. We have some different boots for a very advanced setup, but outside of that, these are pretty good. This amulet we mostly use again because it's just super cheap. We don't have to worry about the less power charge duration because all of our charges are minimum charges. And then we have, obviously, we get the lightning damage per charge, which is nice. You can set things up in a way where you use this 39 to critical strike multiplier if you've gained a power charge recently. If you have an extra power charge, so if you have something like your head corrupted, you can also use things that are like easily corruptible uniques in the head slot instead if you really want. So you can kind of switch things up there. And you can shift some of the load of the resistances onto your jewels. And if you do that, then you'll be able to access an additional power charge. You'll be able to use this 40% crit multi, and it makes the amulet even better. But even without the crit multi, it's a very good kind of starting amulet. It just gives a ton of resistance, right? And it's very easy to corrupt. As you see, I have corrupts on here, 9% movement speed. There's like a ton of good corrupts on amulet. You can get another curse, although that's probably not going to be necessary for this build for a reason I'll get into next. But you can get things like resistances, move speed, just a bunch of good things. So something to keep in mind there. Anathema, this is like the one sort of expensive item. You want to try and probably get this as quickly as possible. How the order I would get things in is basically you want the soul mantle, the staff, and the jewel, probably the quickest, and then you immediately go to Anathema, because you're just trying to get something that is going to go up in price essentially, and Anathema will go up a little bit before it starts to come down. So if you miss the early window of getting this and you're kind of in that mid window, you're going to pay a little bit higher than normal, maybe like closer to a divine. Not the end of the world. It's kind of like I said, the most expensive item in the build. So if you have to pay a little bit more, then so be it. But this is really powerful for us because it allows us to basically use like a ton of curses because we have 5 power charges. It gives us some nice innate cast speed. The intellect isn't even that bad because we're just more energy shield and mana. And it's basically just allowing us to... We have Assassin's Mark, and then we have the Elemental Weakness, Conductivity, as well as Enfeeble. And, you could even do more curses if you want, but those are typically the ones that I will use, and I'll only use them on, like, rares or things of that nature. You end up getting a decent amount of cast speed on this build, especially after you upgrade your staff with essences. I actually recommend using the cast speed essences as they're just really, really cheap in order to, and you basically, what you do to upgrade the staff, we'll kind of break it down really quick, is you get a +3 fractured lightning staff. And the idea is, you see how this one has 158 strength? You want it to be lower than that, preferably like 113, 100 to like 113-ish, just so you can free up some of your attributes requirements, because that's one of the annoying things about using this staff, even though it's really good, is it has a high strength requirement. And you basically just use cast speed essences, and you'll end up getting something that's, pretty decent very quickly. And then as soon as you get that, you can just, you're going to have just like a ton of cast speed. So curses and everything feels good, as well as just totem damage is really strong instead. So the one change I made for this go around is I put a Fated End here instead of a Kikizaru. Now, you're going to start with a Kikizaru for sure, just because it's easier to use, right? It gives like 60% reduced effective curses. You can use the, what do you call them? I forget. Where's the... There's so many things in this build. Oh, I didn't even put one in. Okay, that's why. So we'll just put one in for... you see it's 60% reduced effective curses, and then you can put the catalyst on it, the caster one, that brings us up to 70%, and then you just use the minor soul Yugal, and you have 100% reduced effective curse on you, so curses basically don't do anything to you, and that's obviously really strong, just to mitigate the downside of your soul mantle, but you can also get 100% curse immunity in various different ways. So what we end up doing here is we just put Fated End on, and we actually don't bother to put increased duration on our curses, and it actually makes it so that you just apply your curses kind of like once, you let them tick up, and you end up doing like a lot of damage on a single target essentially. So this is kind of cool, especially for like bossing and things of that nature. I believe how this works is you only need to get one in the 200 to 220 range. I don't think that getting one in 220 range really matters, because non-aura hexes expire upon reaching 220% base effect. So let's say that was 210, right? It goes up by 20 effect per second. So, if you're at 200% effect, then the next second is going to put you at either 210 or 220% base effect regardless. Right, so getting anything from like 200 to 220 basically works here, and you want over 200 essentially. Over 200 base effect is good. A little bit more cast speed for curses, which is never bad. And like I said, if you want to make things super easy on you, just get the Kikizaru, because not only does it give the reduced effective curses, it gives mana regen, it gives a nice amount of regen. If you see, we put this in. Hold on, we'll add this. Our regen's going to go up crazy. Probably like 400 or something. Oops. Yeah, 4 something. So, I mean, Kikizaru is a really good option as well. And you can just swap this in for bossing or something like that if you really want. And yeah, you just need like other reduced effective curse stuff to kind of get you going. And I'll talk about that in a second when we get into the tree. So Arn's Anguish, this is something you just kind of add in later for a lot of damage. You can also use a Darkness Enthroned is another option. If you want stun immunity, I find I tend not to need it, especially on softcore. But if you really want to be completely stun immune, what I do is I go Darkness Enthroned, and then I just use the Abyss Jewels that avoid stun. And you basically have 2 of those in that are like 20-some%, and the belt doubles the effect of them. So as long as you have one that's over like... Well, they won't double it necessarily, but if let's say you have a 28 effect jewel and you have like 90-some% effect of the jewels in it, it almost effectively doubles it. So you're going to basically get 100% like avoid stun from that belt, and then you just add a bunch of flat damage and health or whatever else you want to put on those jewels. So that can be a good option as well. This option is nice because it gives a bunch of life, it gives a bunch of fire resist, and the cool thing about it really is that the brutal charges, they basically allow you to do triple damage. They give you a small chance to do triple damage. And for any type of cold or lightning build, this can be really important because what you're trying to do with the ailments is you're trying to get the highest max hit possible, and you don't need it to be super consistent. So for example, like, I don't need every hit to be like the highest max hit to keep a high level shock on the target, right? I just need a couple good hits at triple damage, and that's going to put a nice shock on the target. So as long as, like, I think it's like 3% chance, and so it's like 12% you end up having, 12 or 15% chance to do triple damage with this belt, which is great because when you have like 4 totems hitting and the cast speed on them is quite good, you see we're at already like 2.1 cast per second even in the budget build, which means that you're going to get triple damage hits in quite often. Now with lightning damage, it's a little bit iffy, right? Because lightning damage has a high variable range, but again, we just have so many totems we're casting so often with them that you're likely to get a decently well-rolled lightning attack that is triple damage amplified, and that's going to put a nice shock on the target until the next one comes along. So that's basically the idea behind Arden's Anguish. Get into the jewels really quick. So Cluster, this is the other most expensive thing that you're probably going to have to get. What I would suggest is you only need Sleepless Sentries right away. So just buy a jewel. You can look it up on PoEDB to figure out the minimum level. I believe it's like 70. I think it's 68 actually is the minimum level totem cluster that you can roll this on. And you basically just roll Sleepless Sentries and then regal it, and you hope to get another notable. And if you don't, it's no big deal. You just put it in and you just allocate Sleepless Sentries in the jewel socket. And Sleepless Sentries is great because it just gives Onslaught for you, which gives 20% increased cast speed for your totems, 20% increased move speed for you, so it's obviously really good. This is something you really want on totems, to not have this as like a huge disadvantage when you're kind of comparing yourself to a normal build that will have access to Onslaught in some form most likely. So really want to have that. Balance of Terror is a great option here. There's like a bunch of different ones you can use depending on what you want. The Lightning Exposure one is great. The base resistance is on it. It's fantastic. You can also do something like make it so you're immune to shock if you've cast Conductivity. I tend to use Enfeeble as well with the other curses, especially on boss-type monsters and things of that nature, which is why I have the Critical Strike multiplier here, but you can really use any combination because you run so many curses, so you have so many decent options here, right? So just get some balance of terror is kind of the idea. We use Cobalt Jewels because we need the reduced effective curse on you here because we're not using Kikazaru. So we have 28 and 28, so we have 56. And then we have 30 from the Soul of Yugal. And then we have 30 from the tree. So we're a little bit over, but that's fine. And this gives good chaos resistance anyway, which is really helpful for the build. Makes us a bit tankier. So yeah, that's why we have the jewels here. And then we just have totem damage and crit multi with lightning. You can put anything on these if you need like something like another strength roll or something like that to help. You see we're a little bit behind on strength. This is a place to get it. Is the jewels. You can also get it from your helmet. You can just craft it on, right? You could use boots that aren't Rainbow Stride and craft it on there, right? So there's a bunch of ways you can kind of make up the strength difference. Also, before you get Arden's Anguish, you're probably going to want to use a heavy belt, and that'll take care of your strength issues without like any issue at all, basically, right? Because the base value is like 30 some additional strength, so just super easy to deal with there. And then obviously we have the Self-Lignation. This is what we synergize with the Soul Mantle to get a bunch of extra damage. It's really easy to have a bunch of curses up, so you're easily over 100% damage with this jewel. Definitely worth it. And we'll kind of just get into the tree really quick. So the tree is nothing special. Again, so we come up here to get the minimum charges, right? So that we're at 5 charges all the time. These things also just all benefit power charges. Just mana, block damage, power charge. Okay. We don't need this. I don't know, so that's a free point. I actually just found that on the fly. I don't know why I had that allocated. Probably because of just a pathing error. So that's great. And then the reason why we come through here and not through the top is just because we need the 10 strength, and it's the same amount anyways, right? Then we come down here for the block and things of that nature. Now, we get 2 totem clusters. You don't need to do this. If you want, you can drop one. There's more damage to be had here, right? The cast speed here is really good. Cast speed and mana regen. The lightning and lightning damage, lightning ailments effect here is also really good. The reason why we get both of these is because we want the totem taunt as well as the 5% damage taken from hits. This is actually just really strong in general because it's like all damage, right? So it's very rare that you get something that affects like all damage types at like a flat 5%. And the cluster's pretty good anyway. And it also kind of brings us into the spot where we have all this damage here anyway. So it's not bad to get this. This cluster, again, it's kind of convenient. It's right there. It gives us a little bit more duration, which can be useful. It can give us a little bit more totem resistance, which can be useful. So I feel like it's not terrible picking up both of these. You can drop one if you only want to either have the taunt or either only want to have the 5% damage taken. So it's just kind of up to you. We do take Mind Over Matter. Now, this is not a strong build for Mind Over Matter in that we don't have a super great mana regen. We have like 400 mana regen. It's nothing terrible. But really, you're not meant to be tanking things with this build, right? The idea is you take a big hit, and then you kind of recover back. So you don't really want to be getting hit often, and that's why we take Mind Over Matter to just inflate our effective HP that much more, make use of any other source of effective health that we can, essentially. And it honestly works pretty well. You're relatively tanky in most normal situations until you get to like really, really hard content like Ubers and stuff like that with Mind Over Matter. So that is pretty much the tree. I think obviously you take Ancestral Bond. I'll go over some of these. So this is something you can drop if you're just like doing normal mapping, you're not bossing. This is something that you can drop as well. It makes it really early on when you don't have as much mana regen. It makes it easier to sustain the mana regen, but I would say you can just drop this and you don't have to worry about it in most cases. These are fine to drop, obviously just a bit extra health, no big deal, so you can kind of mix and match things around at this point. We take this just because the build struggles a bit on attributes. Once you get a staff that's kind of, has a better attribute requirement, right? Again, the staff has 158 strength, so once you have a staff that doesn't require that, you can kind of drop more of this stuff. It also gives resistances as well, so it's not so bad, but you can just drop more and more here. Drop stuff like this if you have the opportunity to, depending on how you upgrade your gear and how quickly you do it, things of that nature. I will note this cluster is actually just really strong for anything lightning, and you are using lightning. You obviously get the lightning walker here, and this caster mastery is actually very underrated for a build like this because we're going to be casting a lot of curses. And especially, I would say, once you get everything online, so once you kind of get the anathema and you're casting all the curses, you're using flame dash, you're using the totems, and then there's some other things that you can cast as well that we'll talk about. We already mentioned one of them being the cold snap. You can get a lot of these, casts from non-instant spells, which means that you end up with honestly a substantial amount of cast speed just from this one node, right? It's not uncommon to have like 30% cast speed from this up at any given time. So this is just a really strong node, and it's just great. If you're doing a strategy also that you need to open chests, right, you can easily just spec into this, and if you want, you could actually, it's obviously going to be less damage, but you could remove all the points from Lightning Mastery here, put them into this, and then just to take the 25% chance to open chests when you cast a spell. So if you're doing an Atlas strategy that revolves around that, you can spec into that very easily through here. So I think that is pretty much everything here. So we'll kind of just get into the skills a little bit, and then I'll talk about how to level it. So skills, arc, crit damage, crit, lightning, and this is very base. Again, there's no awakened stuff on this or anything like that. If you want potentially higher shocks, you can go lightning penetration. The thing is, though, is that I like the consistency of the crits. And the reason why we use multiple totems is because it just feels better, especially on a skill like Arc, to put 2 totems down and have them kind of go to work. Because it's not something like Flame Blast, where the idea is the radius of the ability is what's carrying it, right? So one Flame Blast totem can actually cover quite a large radius. The problem with Arc totems is that Arc only chains a limited number of times, and it obviously gets weaker with every chain. So the idea is having 2 totems out really helps the clear speed, and it's going to just feel so much better with 2 totems. And it's not really that big of a deal because the 2 totems, they're still, I think, I did the math for this at one point. It changes depending on the configuration, obviously, but in most cases, having the additional totem is going to be more damage until certain things kind of align and come into play, especially because we're not using another totem shield, right? So multiple totems, really good here. Now, we use Wrath with Eternal Blessing, just keep it really easy, really simple. We do the curses like we said here, and we have, these are just extra curses, but most of the time you're just going to be running Elemental Weakness, Assassin's Mark, Conductivity, and then Enfeeble when you want. There's also an Enfeeble modifier for Balance of Terror that makes it so you cannot be crit, which is really strong. We use Lightning Golem. Lightning Golem is by far probably the best caster golem to use now because the mana regeneration effect is insane. And because our totems are arc and they chain to things and seek targets, it's actually really easy to keep your golem alive, especially in tier 16s, because we just do such high damage that we kind of eradicate everything on the screen before our golem really gets to take damage. So, and especially if you have Totem Taunt on top of this, the golem is extra safe. So this golem ends up being pretty effective, and if you really need to resummon it, you can, but it doesn't die that often, I would say. Storm Boss Mine, so this is something that you can just use to get a bit of extra damage. It's basically like when you throw the mines in the ground, there's like an aura that is near the mines, and it makes the mob take more damage. So you basically will just, in a single target situation, you'll put your totems down, you'll put your curses up, and then you'll just spam mines, and it can make the boss take quite a bit of damage because you can have quite a few mines up. I think it's like 15 is the normal amount of mines or something like that. I'm not entirely sure, but so 15, and then Arrogance is increasing the effect of this, right? So you have like probably at least like 5% damage taken per mine. 15 mines could be, so like 75% increased damage taken. It'd be something like that. You don't have to do this, obviously. This is kind of just something that's, you do if you have the opportunity, right? It's not something that you have to do on every encounter or anything like that. The Cold Snap we already mentioned, and the last thing I actually wanted to talk about was the Sigil of Power. So this is a build that uses mana for our skill, obviously, so we can use Sigil of Power. It's a bit tricky to use this sometimes because you have to stay inside the Sigil, but this can be really good if you do stuff like Ritual and things of that nature. It's obviously good for bosses to just like kind of precast at least. It's always something nice to just have on your links, especially now that we have access to more keybinds and things of that nature, because there's really no harm in having it there, right? Even if you don't really get a chance to use it in a difficult fight, you can always open the fight with and get more damage there. You can use it on some of the league mechanics, like I said. So this is never a bad thing to just have, even if you're not making a ton of use of it. And like you can see, if we put this up to like 4, right, we gain a ton of damage from it, and we also take reduced damage. So just really huge there, and definitely a good skill to have in your repertoire. And one last thing about the kind of budget build here before we kind of get into talking about the other version is one of the advantages of running uniques like this is that they are relatively cheap. So you can see, Anathema is not really the cheap one, but this is a great candidate right here for a corruption, okay? Great candidate for a corruption. Great candidate for a corruption. Great candidate for a corruption. Like, they're all great candidates for corruption. To one degree or the other. The only thing that kind of is a little bit of a drag is that the Soul Mantle, it doesn't have a good +2 on it, really. There's only the +1 to gems, then 49% damage. If you had a totem that uses like a projectile spell or an area of effect spell, the Soul Mantle Corruption becomes very strong because you can get a +2 relatively easily to either one of those, right? It's not quite as good, but it's still good. So just something to kind of keep in mind there, right? And yeah, let's just talk about, we'll talk about the other version really quick, and then we'll talk about how to kind of play it, right? So go back. We're actually going to save the changes because we did fix something on this version. And I think this is the one. Okay, so the main change that you're going to want to keep in mind, you notice that most of the items are the same. Okay, we end up changing out the boots for just more move speed because I prefer more MS. Also make sure resistance is a lot more flexible, but we're basically adding in the Light of Meaning, and we put it in a spot where it's going to get a lot of value. And what Light of Meaning does is it just, all the small passes in the radius grant additional lightning damage, which is really strong. And then we get Militant Faith. You can see Militant Faith right here. Now, you have to be careful because Militant Faith sometimes takes these over and changes them to something else. You have to make sure you get one that doesn't change them. Look up the number before you buy it, put it into PoE and test it. I think there's also a website that allows you to do that. And you notice that we come here and we snag this in this particular setup, and that's because the jewel sockets are tighter, which means that we don't have as many sockets to put in jewels that allow us to reduce curse effectiveness. So we need to get curse effectiveness from the tree. So we have 30 here, 20 here, which is 50. Then we have 30 from the miner here, and then we have 20 from a jewel, basically. So that's how we cap it out. Speaking of the majors here, you can do Brine King or Lunaris, I think are the main two, right? So it kind of depends. If you're getting stunned a lot, or if you just want like a very easy way to not be frozen, then just get the Brine King. If you have those things kind of taken into account already, then you can run Lunaris. Chaining honestly tends to not be a super big of a problem unless your damage is really low, right? If your damage is high, you're mostly just destroying things that could chain off your totems anyway. But if you want to have both of these unlocked and you just swap to this one when you have a map with chain in it, if you think it's going to be difficult, that's absolutely fine to do. It's always good to have more options, right? So, but yeah, it's a very similar build. You can see not really that much changes. It's just incorporating more jewels in. We basically add a cluster, and the cluster here is basically to get another jewel socket easily, is sort of the idea, to relieve socket pressure. And for these, you can almost do like anything, but we just do Conjured Wall, Mage Hunter, and Sap here. You can also just do a lightning cluster as well. There's good options on the lightning cluster, so you don't have to use a spell cluster, but I just prefer that. So yeah, the link to this will be in the description as well. And you can spend more currency than this, but I think this is a kind of like a logical endpoint for the build. I think the last thing you tend to get would be Light of Meaning. Militant Faith can sometimes be expensive, sometimes be cheap. I'd say like your max going to pay like a divine for this. If you're getting one that's like kind of perfect, we actually have one that's imperfect because you see it says 3% defenses from equipped shield. We're not even using a shield. You can get these so that, if we can find it here, you can really customize these. So you can do totem damage and elemental damage, right? Something like this is going to be more expensive though. If I save this in, your damage is going to go up a little bit. It's not really the end of the world because you don't get a ton of devotion out of the slot anyway. You're mainly using this for the more damage on power charges because you're going to have 5 charges active at all times. One thing to note with this Militant Faith is that in some circumstances, it's not going to be as big of an upgrade as you would think, because if you're able to get frenzy charges on various encounters, so for example, if you have something like a dangerous expedition, right, and you put your cold snap down and your totems are slaying everything, you're going to be instantly going back to like 3 frenzy charges really quick, and 3 frenzy charges is a lot of damage. It's like 12% more damage and 12% increased cast speed, so that's obviously quite strong, and you're unable to get frenzy charges when you have Inner Conviction. Gain power charges instead of frenzy charges, right? So when you're trying to gain frenzy charges, you're just going to gain power charges instead, which means you can't gain frenzy charges, which means that, you're going to have 15% more damage from the power charges, but you're not having your frenzy charges. So really, you're probably coming out about even in situations where you're able to keep your frenzy charges up, but against bosses and stuff like that, Inner Conviction is just better. It's more consistent overall, which is why we would eventually slot it into the build. It's just not something that's a really big priority. So yeah, that is basically everything. And I'll talk about the leveling very briefly. So leveling, I don't have like a configuration put in here, but basically what you want to do is just use Holy Flame Totem, and I Mule Witch at the start. I get an Explosive Trap. I Holy Flame Totem, and Holy Flame Totem, Explosive Trap. Then once I get Stormbrand from the Merville quest, we switch to Stormbrand, and Stormbrand becomes our main clear. Explosive Trap becomes our main single target. We don't put any additional traps on it. We keep it a single trap, and we just have it hit hard. And what we do is we keep our totem as well, but the totem no longer becomes the primary clear. So when we're kind of clearing through the Act 1, the totem is doing most of our trash clearing, right? Once we get the Stormbrand, that becomes our primary trash clear, and then we drop our totem again on bosses and things of that nature, just for more damage. So on a boss, we'll drop the totem, we will have a Stormbrand on them, and we'll be spamming Explosive Trap. Explosive Trap you can link with basically anything. You start with Added Lightning, then you progress to either Added Fire or Lightning to Physical Lightning from Act 2. And basically you try and get to Act 3 as quickly as possible, and then you get the... you just get any 4-link, basically, that is 3 blue and 1 red. Once you obtain that, you socket, Spell Totem, Arc, Faster Casting, and Added Lightning, and then you just go from there. If you want, you can do the library for Lightning Penetration. It's a little bit better than Faster Casting, but it doesn't matter, really, right? You can just be on Faster Casting, and that works just fine. So... Also, the reason why you don't use something like Controlled Destruction is because early on, you want Elemental Overload. So the pathing very early looks like you kind of go through the normal nodes here on top, right? This is obviously a late game pathing where you come up here, so you go through the normal nodes, you get this cluster, and then you go immediately to Elemental Overload. If you feel more confident, you can immediately rush Elemental Overload and not get this cluster, but this helps people live in the early game if you're a new player. So I recommend new players get this, and then you basically go to Elemental Overload, and the idea is Elemental Overload works on a crit. So you don't want to use something like Controlled Destruction early game when you have very, very little crit, because you end up not proccing Elemental Overload basically at all. So you try and find other alternative gems, and that is why we use Cast Speed, Added Lightning, and then you have Spell Totem and Arc. Ideally, you want to buy Spell Totem and Arc, especially Arc, early, and then have it leveling in one of your slots. That way, when it comes time to switch it for lab, you just switch it immediately. You only want to switch to Arc Totem, like I said, after you have a 4-link, and you want to do the normal lab, because normal lab gives you... We haven't talked about the Ascendancy, but I'll actually talk about that briefly. So it gives you your first lab points, which you put on Pursuit of Faith here, which gives you +1 additional totem. So you basically would go from only having 1 totem to then grabbing this and then grabbing Ancestral Bond. So how it kind of works is, like I said, you come through here, you put points in all this stuff, right? You put points in Elemental Overload. Then you're going to come over here, you're going to put points into here and then here. And then you're going to come directly up here and come to Ancestral Bond. And you want to have your tree extend out to Ancestral Bond, and then you can be putting points in anything else, right? So you just put points in other things. But the idea is that you always want to have like 1 point right below Ancestral Bond. That way, when it comes time to switch over, it just takes 1 point to allocate in here, right? And then you transition completely to a totem build. Now, once you're in the totem build, you still use Explosive Trap. And that's why we have some Dex here. You also want to use a Dex Amulet because you're going to need that in order to maintain Explosive Trap. Explosive Trap just does a ton of damage, especially when it's Ellie converted, and you're going to have Elemental Weakness by Act 3. So, yeah, I mean, I also recommend for Explosive Trap, you want to have it physical to Lightning, because you want half the damage at least converted to Lightning, because you are going to be using Wrath. And it just does incredible damage, and it basically helps bridge your single target gap. You can also use things like Lightning Spire Totem. You'd have to do the library for that early on. I typically don't think it's worth it, but once I get to Act 6, I pick it up. And the rotation on the boss is basically like, put our totems down, we put our curse up, we put our Lightning Spire Trap down, and then we just cast Explosive Traps on the boss, so... And the Explosive Trap link, it's probably just going to be, like I said, like added Lightning, Explosive Trap, and then physical to Lightning, and then Trap and Mind damage, or just something else that affects traps. So, yeah, that's basically the 2 4 links that you're going to have in the early game. Eventually, you kind of just fade out of using traps, and the idea is that your trap is eventually going to fall really far behind. Basically, once you're done with the campaign, you're not really using traps anymore. And that's the point where you're going to be replacing your trap with the more damage taken, because as you kind of transition into maps, your totems are going to get a lot stronger, and they're going to be the primary mechanism for like what's dealing most of your damage. So it becomes more important to augment your totem damage at that point, rather than try and supplement it with something like a trap. So that's why we move on to Stormblast Mines at that point. And the Stormblast Mines, remember, we're not throwing them to try and detonate them. We actually want to leave them on the ground to give the aura effect for the totems to do more damage. So, yeah, that's basically what we have there. And then the Anoint, we just basically do a crit Anoint. I think we have on most of these. Yeah, Heartseeker. It's actually a really cheap one. I think it comes from down here. And yeah, that's basically the build. So thank you guys so much for watching. Like I said, I'm going to post a more detailed video, but I just kind of wanted to put something out before League start. It's only like an hour left, but I know some people kind of get home from work late and stuff, and maybe they're just looking for stuff while they're at work. So hopefully this guide helps you guys if you just want like a really easy starter. I'm going to be streaming on Twitch. It's Powered Heal. I'll put it in the description. So if you guys have any questions or anything like that, I'll be streaming probably for most of the weekend at least. So just feel free to come into Twitch and yeah, just ask me whatever questions. I'll do my best to answer them. I'll try to be looking at chat. I usually don't get too many viewers, so sometimes I forget. But I'll make a special reminder because it is League Start. So thank you guys for watching. If you like this, if it helped you, like, comment, subscribe, and I will talk to you guys next time. See ya.